Watkiss is joining me now. Mike, what a career. Hard copy, a current affair, real TV. You were given an award from the FBI for Citizen of the Year or something like that back in Phoenix. And
Something like that, yes.
yeah, you tracked down OJ, the FLDS, World Trade Center attacks, Timothy McVeigh. You interviewed the Night Stalker. You also spoke with Elizabeth Taylor. You have an undergrad in anthropology from Stanford, a master's in journalism from Columbia. And we got to mention your book, which I can't wait to read, Story Hustler, Murder, Mayhem, PTSD. And you also have a YouTube channel, Story Hustler. You've been hustling stories a while.
Too long. And that narrative makes me think I should have thrown in the towel a long time ago.
No, 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 no. We
I've
need.
been lucky, Nate. I've been really lucky. And, the only thing I can say about my career when I look back is just fortunate to have had a piece of some really big stories. And I'm grateful for that.
I want to talk about some of these, but let's kick off with the Lori Daybell trial. You were there every day. I don't know if anyone was surprised by the verdict. Maybe you were. What was your overall take on the trial and the proceedings?
This story obviously has been going on for a long time, and you really have been the face and the voice chronicling this really extraordinary series of events. So credit to you. I knew of it when it first broke. A number of my reporter friends, given my history of covering issues involving people who were of Mormon faith and sort of branched off into their own crazy when Lori first broke, the stories here in Arizona broke, a number of reporter friends of mine reached out and said, "What's the Mormon element?" Thinking, my expertise and knowledge may have some. And I said, "I don't know this woman, and this sounds like some break off, apocalyptic group, and I'm not familiar with them." So my touch or contact with this story really has been as a viewer watching your stuff and reading the headlines over the last 3 years, or a number of years. But with the trial taking place here and being a connoisseur, an old connoisseur of courtroom dramas, I thought I really wanted to go sit in on this and see what the Mormon dimension was to the story, what the craziness surrounding this, and it's a hell of a story. And I'm not surprised. I think Trina Kay put together a very solid prosecution. Again, I'm a student of these things. I sat through OJ's trial, Warren Jeff's bizarre trial in Texas and in St. George, Jodi Arias, our last big high-profile shindig here in the Valley. So I've seen the court process over the many decades. And also, one of the fascinating things of this story for me is how the stories are now covered and the evolution of the media's involvement. Back in the day, with OJ, it was just camera guys working for the networks and local news throwing, elbows in the scrum trying to get the pictures. And it was those were people were covering it. OJ changed everything in terms of these big trials, and then we saw change with the evolution with Jodi Arias, and now guys like you are really the people who are the voices to listen to in stories like Lori Daybell, because the podcasters are really leading the charge in most of these kinds of stories.
Well, I appreciate that. I want to talk about the Mormon element. In Idaho, the focus of the trials were really money, power, sex. And the prosecutors really focused on those aspects with religious elements coming in. And they're saying Chad and Lori used religion as a front to get money, power, sex.
I think the prosecutors had a point because I'm, an old school guy who's been covering human dramas and it usually boils down to money, power, and sex. And you gussy it up with, you can get some crazy, freaky religion or some whatever, and that's just the window dressing that is the excuse and the justification for bad people to do bad things. Warren Jeffs. We wanted to, but yeah, at the end of the day, Lori seems to me a woman who's very much a status, money, her own well-being. That's what she's interested in, and she wanted that $1 million life insurance policy, no doubt. She wanted to run off with her now fifth husband, her new doomsday beau, this goofy guy Chad. I look at some of these guys who become sort of these cult leaders, and I think, what is it about this guy? Because I look at him and I think, what a doofus. just to boil it down. A guy like Warren Jeffs, a guy like Chad Daybell. But, I interrupted you. I'm interested in what the prosecutors are saying. But at the end of the day, all of these stories basically boil down to the very basic human instincts interested in money and power and sex.
Right. We did hear a lot more of the religious stuff in Chad's trial, I think, because or at least from people that I've interviewed that say he seemed to be making it up as he went along in a way.
Sounds like it. Yeah.
But Lori seems, based on people I've spoken with, that she really might believe this stuff.
Yeah.
Granted, is that a justification to murder? No, of course not. But she seemed to get fiery when they bring up Nephi in the court. I mean, what was your take when those things would come up and her reaction?
Well, again, I went down there hoping for, I confess, I went down there hoping for a train wreck. I was thinking this woman is watching her final statement up in Idaho and the interviews that I have seen of this woman. I'm thinking, being sort of a person who loves courtroom drama. I first of all, when I heard she was going to defend herself, I said, "Oh yeah, now it's interesting." And and then, with the religious and her sort of crazy statements in the past, I was thinking, I'm going to go down and we're going to see a meltdown. There's going to be heads spinning around. People are going to be talking in tongues. We're going to be talking about zombies. None of that. It really wasn't any of that. And I think you're right. I think Lori she's comes from a Mormon family, had real beliefs, a real belief system. And I think that, she embellished that with sort of the apocalyptic, preparing a people kind of mentality that, you see, I think, among a good many Mormon folk, but she really took it to a wacky extreme. But she does seem to be a zealot about this. I noted the same thing when they were talking. She was talking to the detective about the Book of Mormon and the story of Nephi. She really seemed to be agitated, defensive about that stuff. Like, how dare you? An apostle or someone who's not even part of our religion talking about the Book of Mormon and it was. I thought that was an eye-opening moment as well.
Yeah, I am in touch with people who communicate with her in jail, and she asked them this weekend before closing arguments. So I guess last weekend, what are your thoughts on Nephi? Can you believe that the detective would infer that that's the one story they pull out of all the book, the one that I would kill? And she said, I plan to address this in her closing, and she did. That's how she ended her closing.
Yeah.
Otherwise, it's a family tragedy. So
Can I just get rid of a phone call?
yeah, you're good.
Thank you, sir. Sorry about that.
Um,
Right. Yeah.
So from that religious element to the FLDS, how did you first get involved in following that whole bizarre, twisted, decades-long story?
Well, like you, I was born and raised in Utah. Come from a Mormon family, have long roots in it, have polygamist ancestors. So, in many ways, it's sort of my DNA. And I always just found it. I confess I'm not LDS now, but well, the theology never really spoke to me. The history I had been a student of since I was a kid, and found it fascinating. No polygamous families throughout my life. They're scattered throughout the Utah Salt Lake Valley, and just knew that they're with a big group like the FLDS and the Kingstons up in northern Utah. With a big group like that, there's some really dark stuff that goes on to sustain that. And I became, there's the independents who may be good guys and they may have nice families and whatever. But when to make a big group like the FLDS work, you really have to sort of have the criminality and the abuse and the force built into the system, and just got access to it. I didn't set out to spend most of my career covering, fundamentalist nuts in this American Southwest, but it turned out to be that way because I got to know more people and I got to pulled into it. And since I've retired, I've been pulled, in essence, pulled back into the story because I have contacts because, and I think I can still make a difference. And we're very much back, and my daughter and I, covering, the latest manifestation, the new business model of Warren and the FLDS, and now breakoff guys like Sam Bateman. But again, it's not like I set out to. I'm going to do all of. I'm going to spend my career covering these knuckleheads, but it just sort of panned out that way.
But there's a that you can cover the story, which, a lot of us jump in, we cover it, and then we move on to something. You really dove in. And
And that's the problem. I've covered, truly covered this for about 50 years, and various, various leaders, John Singer and Alex Joseph, people who really know the history will know these names. These are the guys who were the Warrens and the big names before, generations ago. So I've now known generations of these guys and generations of families and generations of victims, and so with that knowledge, I just feel like it's sort of incumbent on me to be involved. We got back involved when a family called me a couple of years ago and said our daughter had gone missing.
mm,
You got involved in that story shortly after that, but and I'm grateful to you because you're right. The networks drop in and do hour specials on this every 2 or 3 years. This story goes on a granular level day to day where there are victims and their real lives, and so I sort of made, and I had fortunate, I have worked for people, and had the energy to do this. I worked for people who allowed me to go and sort of cover this as if it was, my day to day beat, and which is challenging because Colorado City is a 14-hour round trip drive from my house here. So every time I wanted to go up and get a soundbite or a little B-roll, it basically entailed a 14-hour drive, and it's a long drive. And the older I got, the more my backside got, it just went through conniptions every time I thought about making that ride. But we did it, and I think we had a hand in sort of exposing Warren, and probably I think we can claim to have a hand in pushing him into that Texas prison cell. And
Warren knew who you were. Warren knew you. All the leaders knew you. Did
yeah,
you
yeah.
ever
They
tell
had there's a fun that you go up into the Colorado City town offices now, and as soon as you go in the, if anybody's been there, there'll be a big glass sort of security wall or door. As soon as you go in the front door of, and that door, according to an employee of the city during a deposition in a court case, she said that security wall was installed to keep Mike Watkiss from walking in.
him?
I take great pride in thinking that I
Oh,
added to the infrastructure of Colorado City, and I was hoping for a plaque on the wall,
right.
but just the acknowledgement in that legal proceeding. Yeah, I think that they changed the security because we would show up all the time. Not like we'd drop in, and you've been there probably. I'm sure you've been there, but in the old days, if some outsider walked in there, everybody knew.
Right.
So, when the networks went in there on their, biannual or whenever, or the other TV stations went up for their 1 year story, they all knew they were there and can sort of, but we were able to sort of get in there all the time. And they started putting up walls and security cameras and everything else. And I think that I definitely had a hand in that.
Did you ever have a chance to talk to Warren Jeffs or ask him a question? I know he
Oh
probably
yeah.
back.
Well, no, Warren would never condescend to interview a guy like me. But when we finally had Warren down in that Texas trial down in San Angelo, Texas, on a hot summer now, what, 15 years ago, it was crazy. But Warren Jeffs was representing himself against the charges, of raping those two girls in the photographs that you've seen. And I realized that this is probably my one and only time to share some quality time with Warren. So I positioned myself every day outside the court as he did his little perp walk with the Texas Rangers, and ask him about raping two girls. And midway through the trial, ask him how the lawyer thing was working out for him. So every day when Warren went in, and I posted these things on our website, Story Hustler, the coverage of, because I had sort of a pointed question for Warren every day that he walked in there because I wanted him to know that I was there sharing that moment with him.
Good for you. That's amazing. And he represented himself like Lori Vallow, didn't he?
Yes. And in many ways, it was the Warren experience that made me think, oh, this is going to be rich. Lori's going to be, and let's give Daybell her due, as I have written. Give Lori Daybell her due. She wasn't an epic disaster. She wasn't a catastrophic meltdown in that courtroom. Her head didn't spin around like Linda Blair. She didn't talk in tongues. She didn't spit up, whatever. She behaved herself fairly well. I don't think she did herself. You saw the interviews. You and I were doing the interviews with some of those jurors on their way out, and we asked, what did they think of her work as a lawyer? They were obviously unimpressed.
Right.
So I don't think she did herself any favors, but Warren was an utterly different. This is the thing. You asked me if he'd interview me. He never would. He insisted on representing himself. So the judge in the court down in Texas had to give him time. And there were moments where the prosecution would have like a 45-minute introduction. Warren would then be given 45 minutes, and he would get up, bow his head, and stand and mumble prayers for 45 minutes. It was, I mean, as the packed court, and everybody's just watching this cat, go into his own little narcissistic world and make everybody wait. By the end of that trial, I always maintain that it was lucky for Warren Jeffs that there were a lot of big Texas Rangers in that room, because after that jury had listened to the rape audio tapes and heard that trial and watched Warren's just effrontery, rudeness to the judge and it's lucky all those cops were in the courtroom, because there were a lot of people, including the jurors, who wanted to kill Warren with their bare hands.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah. He did everything he could to piss off the jury, to piss off the judge, and it was just. I mean, from a theatrical point of view, it was like, "Are you kidding? This is amazing."
Right.
But the strength of my friend Rebecca Wall and the people who helped them put the case together, when he went down. But representing yourself, I have never seen that. I've seen it a bunch of times. I've never seen it work out very well for the
Yeah.
defense.
Seems like most attorneys tell me the same thing, that it just
Yeah,
perfect.
yeah.
And there were no cameras in that trial, unfortunately, with Warren.
Sadly, no.
Yeah.
So, this is the beauty of we can sit around it and watch Lori Daybell from here until eternity, and people will continue to recycle your work and this story forever, because you got all the pictures and the narratives there, and it's just crazy enough, and let's I talk about it in terms of telling a story. There are two kids that got killed here, and two innocent people, Charles and that lovely woman up
I
in
mean,
Iowa. Yeah, they're dead. They're people who died because I was trying to figure out in my last little essay I was writing, what is Lori? Is she now a serial killer? I mean, her numbers are high enough, I think, to be in but can you be a serial co-conspirator killer? I don't even know what category of homicide that I put her in, but
well, the conspiracy charge is under first degree murder. So you're
oh
found.
yeah,
I
I
mean,
mean she's got the body count to be a serial killer at this point, I think.
wow. Well, speaking of criminals and history, the Night Stalker.
Yeah.
How did that story come up? Well, first of all, for those people that aren't familiar with this, give us a little bit of background, and how did you get involved? And didn't you eventually end up interviewing him?
Richard Ramirez, the Night Stalker. He was one of the first serial killers that got a brand name, the Night Stalker. The reporters loved that, a handle,
Right.
and he terrorized Southern California. He was this Texas drifter, born and raised in Texas, made his way to uh, uh, Southern California in the early '80s, and just was like an epidemic of murder and madness. He started off slipping into people's homes and robbing them, and then it escalated into assaulting them and killing them, and just these acts of brutality. And they really started off by sort of home invasion robberies. And Richard dug it. And by the time, people can Google Richard. Netflix did an interesting doc on him not long ago. And there's the first sound you hear is Richard's voice saying, "We're all evil." And that's from my interview. So when you see that
Wow.
in the Netflix, the bottom line is Richard by the time I got sucked into the insanity. The trials had happened, the murders had happened. Richard was being held in San Francisco Been tried in LA, found guilty of 13 homicides. I think it was 13. Being tried for a 14th and 15th killing up in San Francisco. So he's in a county jail, not in a prison. And there are a bunch of groupies that are now going to the jail to fighting at the doors to get in see Richard Ramirez. Richard was a sort of a rock star, had a whole slew of groupie girlfriends, from porn stars to, single moms with kids that were, girls, women, and one of them was a juror from his LA trial. They were all sort of coming up to San Francisco and they were getting in fights. We heard about that. I worked for the TV show A Current Affair at the time, and I was like, that's our story.
Right.
The fine. So we went up, immediately got on an airplane from LA to San Francisco, and I went to the jail, met some of his girlfriends. One of them we became friends. And next thing I know, I'm sitting with her, talking to Richard, saying, how about an interview? Long and the short of it is we worked it out sort of through the girlfriend. And we got, I think, one of the first. He only did a couple of interviews, sit down interviews, but it was a very feisty interview. I don't look at it as one of my best because I went in really pissed off. I had just interviewed a man who Richard had attacked. It got broken. One of the victims who survived, a guy who got shot 3 times in the head while he was laying in bed.
Mm.
Uh, by Richard, and his girlfriend raped, and a horrible situation. The last home invasion before Richard got caught. I interviewed that guy before I talked to Richard, so I was sort of pissed off at what a punk Richard was. So
Right.
it's a very feisty interview. I don't say it was one of my best. I went in too angry and too personally involved, but it turned into a pretty nice little verbal slugfest for about 30 minutes. And a lot of it's online and
I was going
still
to ask, do you know if
so
it,
it's still out there in the
okay,
ether. Yeah.
good. So was he kind of a charmer? I mean, if all these,
Oh, yeah, well, a big, tall kid, had horrible teeth, smelled bad. I mean, but he had sort of, I don't know. I thought he was a complete punk, big, scrawny, tall guy, and I wanted to punch him in the face the whole interview. But he clearly had, a charisma. A lot of women thought he was sort of a, Mick Jagger-esque rock star. And during his trial in LA, I mean, he was walking around with pentagrams on his hand and wearing sunglasses in the court, flipping off the judge. It was such a circus, and
mm,
he loved it, and he played to it. And he was. I'll tell you one thing. I think he was a very bright kid. And you look back at his early history and his horrible. He had his main role model was his uncle, who was a serial killer.
mm.
So yeah, you look back at a guy like Richard Ramirez's backstory, and you think this guy's going to go off the rails. It really is just a matter of how bad is he going to go off the rails with this screwed up a childhood. And so I do think he was a very bright young man who just, was turned into a really bad person.
Speaking of a circus, you were at OJ in LA.
Camp OJ, baby. Yeah,
Yeah, how was that?
yeah, nuts. From the day, we were the morning they found the bodies of Ron and Nicole. We were racing to another story early in the morning. I had a phone call. We're already on the freeway. Get to this address and OJ something, girlfriend, boy got dead. My assignment editor, the guy was giving me, had no idea what it was. It was just murders and OJ. So we're within 15 minutes of the location. We peel off the freeway and we're one of the first crews there at the crime scene on at Nicole's condo. And we ended up spending the next months just doing nothing but OJ. There's a clip that everybody runs. It's sort of like Warren going into court. OJ, when they first brought him back from Chicago, the killings occurred. He got on a plane. They took him down to Parker Center, and there's a scene where he's walking, and every doc will show you this. There's a scene where OJ's in, I think, a white golf shirt coming out of the police station the first time, and he was just scared like a little kid, And there's a gaggle of us there, and OJ, what happened? And I just wish I could go back and live that morning and the moment and throw the just OJ, did you kill him? Because I don't think any of it, and he was just terrified in those early moments. To watch this story unfold and to see how, and then he immediately got his sort of blocking back defenders and his dream team and everything. But Yeah, I was there from the earliest moments of OJ and watched the trial of the century sort of unfold before my eyes.
Were you surprised at the not guilty?
And OJ's?
Yeah.
No, not a bit. I think that given given what Ito allowed Johnny to do in that courtroom and the handicaps of the trial, no, I'm not a bit surprised. I think that as soon as they moved it downtown to L.A., I think that's when it was already moved it out of Santa Monica where it should have been. They won that trial as soon as they moved it downtown.
Mm.
And I think that that was the Dream Team's most strategic move. It showed how America just still, shockingly views the world in black and white. And I think that that was one of those moments where it was a real eye opener for everybody in America to see, how very different I think most white Americans saw that trial, and most Black Americans saw that trial. And I think it was a Rorschach test on race, and it was again one of those just fascinating moments that tells a lot about us.
Well, it also changed the media forever. I
Oh,
mean, Court TV got launched, CNN, every network's carrying it wall to wall, and people are glued to it.
Totally. And this is why, and we've had this discussion. This is why I think people like you are interesting because I think you're part of an evolution that I have seen with every major trial, high profile cluster, you know what, trial over the many decades. OJ changed media. I mean, CNN at that point was still sort of a struggling entity trying to find an identity, its own identity. Or do we just do the regular half-hour block of news with different news? Or OJ showed cable news that the way to survive is to throw all in 24/7 on one big story and just talk it to death. You're not going to lose an audience that way. The standard newscast wasn't working for them. And so you're right. Core TV, certainly CNN, the future of Fox, all of those guys really found their business model, the working business model in O.J. Simpson. Fast forward a couple of years to Jodi Arias, and now you have people like Nancy Grace leading the charge. I mean, I looked at that, and most of the time, we felt like that courtroom was just filled with
And
Nancy's groupies. And outside that, in the plaza where we were interviewing the Daybell jurors the other day, 8 times as many people, and it was all fired up because of Nancy Grace. So again, the media's involvement in that. Warren Jeffs and his trial, they took all those kids out, and Oprah Winfrey went down to Texas and did a sympathetic interview about the FLDS, and really got hoodwinked by their propaganda. And suddenly, the people in Texas changed their mind and said, "Oh, we're sorry, we're going to give the kids back." That was a mistake. These are the roles of the media has screwed up the Jeff story. That's another and not been helpful, I think, on a number of occasions. And now we fast forward to Miss Daybell, and it really is like the local TV reporters, the guys that I used to be, and they're sort of bit players in all this. The people who are driving this story are you. And a couple of those there are a couple of women I met there that you seem to do very quality broadcasts and made, and this is a big story. And it's just interesting to see, for an old connoisseur of courtroom dramas and the media, to see how these dramas are now covered by the media. And you guys are the tip of the spear on this now.
well, it definitely has changed, and there definitely is an interest in it. And,
Yeah.
you know, a lot of people think they can do a podcast and they grab a microphone and talk. I think it does help to have the journalistic ethics and training and background to do it, much like, you have.
Well, yeah, and you've distinguished, yeah, because you had all that, you paid your dues and,
Right.
learned shops in a little out of the way markets the way you should do. And you're right, the quality is there's a great disparity between the quality of something like what you're doing and some podcasters. But, that's where this, I think the innovation is these days.
Craziest, this is a big question. Craziest circumstance, situation you found yourself in reporting the news.
Oh, standing out one night, we were in this just comes to mind. There was a guy named Orson William Black. He was one of the FLDS men that was one of the earliest guys to ever get charged in Arizona. I think he was the first guy to get charged in Arizona. It was an important case. And we were with a bunch of, we were had him cornered in a house up on Colorado one windy night. And we were with a couple of cops and they had him cornered in a house. And it turns out there were a bunch of kids in it, and the cops just said, "We're not going to do anything." And so this guy that we had been chasing for a long time slipped off into the night, and it wasn't until years later that I tracked him down in Mexico, and he got away again. And so, bad moments. I just moments when my bad guy, got away, and they haunt me and this Sam Bateman trial that is something we should probably talk about. But long before Sam came up on the radar screen, he came and just sort of exposed himself and his crimes to me, and I tried to sort of let law enforcement know about it, and a year and just crickets. So these are things that sort of keep me awake at night. Missing children, stories about killed kids. These are the things that still keep a crazy old man like me awake at night, thinking, we're not finished yet.
The name of the book, Story Hustler, Murder Mayhem, PTSD. PTSD. Do you think you have PTSD?
Some guy called me 15, 20 years ago while I was working here. And the first thing I was asked, I just wanted, are you okay? I'm afraid you suffer PTSD. And, I'd never really considered that. I think I've seen too much bad stuff. And I think it does sort of have an impact on you. And I'm not sure that's a bad thing. I think my children would tell you that they're in their mid-20s, and when they leave our house, I still walk them to the end of the driveway, tell them to be careful and fasten their seatbelt. And I say that's the PTSD. I've seen so much bad stuff. I'm just so protective of my own family now.
Right. On your YouTube channel, tell us about Story Hustler, your YouTube channel. What are you and your daughter doing with that?
Well, we started it during the pandemic, so like a lot of people, thought we needed to stay in touch with the world. We talked about, I'd written the book, and it's just a collection of essays and rants, and me settling scores with guys I'm pissed off with. I mean, they're just short, late night reading, but talks about my encounter with Richard Ramirez and a bunch about Warren. But my daughter and I started. She's a journalist and a TV reporter in Texas now, but we started sitting down and just talking about some of the trials, some of the cases that I'd covered, and some of the famous ambushing Elizabeth Taylor on an airplane one time when she was flying off to be with Michael Jackson. Funny story. But during the last 3 years, we really have locked into focusing on what Warren Jeffs and the FLDS community are now doing, which is not getting much attention. And I think it's an important story. And this is what you talked about, you got involved in, because they put out an edict that said gather up the children, and suddenly kids started going missing. That's a problem. And then we've been really following for the last year or so the Sam Bateman case, which sort of was dumped into my lap, and I'm just upset that his abuse of these, and we now know several of the young women and girls who were involved in this, who are doing very well, I want to say. But the fact that this kind of stuff can go on, and even law enforcement is informed about it and really doesn't take it seriously, is very disturbing to me.
All right, I'm gonna have you back. We want to do a deep dive on the FLDS, the state of the church, the religion now, and also Samuel Bateman and all that.
Anytime I can help you, Nate. One of the best parts of this was really getting acquainted with you and getting to see some of your work. So I'm grateful for that.
I'm fascinated by your story, Mike. You remind me. I know another lady told me this of Charlie LaDoff in Detroit, and we had a guy in
But I've been told that before. Yeah,
yeah, and
I don't know
Mark.
how he'd feel about that, but
Well, you all are both. I admire your work, and another guy in Richmond I work with, Mark Holmberg, who didn't go to college, but was a bricklayer, and then started writing and went on to win a Pulitzer Prize for his writing, and he's done journalism and just has a really unique view of the world. And anyway, Mike, you're the best. Thank you, and we'll talk again soon.
get home to that wife and beautiful family of yours. And but thanks for your time here and us getting acquainted.
Thanks, Mike. Take care.